Walking with Jesus through the Gospels, and we are in the upper room. We're sharing the Passover meal, and Jesus is giving some instruction to us. He has just finished recently the third cup. There was a blessing that he had given over the bread. Do you remember what that blessing was?
Said it in Hebrew.
But I also said it in English. It would be shocking if you said it back in Hebrew, yeah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. So Jesus is giving thanks to the Lord. He's uttering a blessing. But there's something more that he's speaking in the context here as he's saying this. What is the contents of what he is implementing throughout this Passover meal that has never been any aspect of it for the last 1,500 years? Pardon me? There's no lamb. There was a lamb at that time. They had lamb, but not today. There's no lamb. So Jews that celebrate Passover today, there is no lamb. But Jesus and his disciples would have celebrated with the lamb of the Passover sacrifice.
That statement you just made, then Jews celebrate Passover today. There's no lamb. Is that because those Jews are acknowledging Christ as the Messiah?
No.
Okay.
All Jews, every Jew today, when they celebrate Passover, there's no lamb.
Why is that?
So there's no lamb because there's no means by which they can sacrifice it, because there's an element that's missing. Very important. Without this, you cannot have a sacrifice. What is it? What is it?
Temple.
There's no temple today. So since AD 70, there's been no temple, and as a result of that, no sacrifices. So they can't have any observance with a Paschal lamb for their Passover Seder. So Jesus, in giving instruction with this, all that he's doing now, he's implementing something new, because the fulfillment of what this Passover for the last 1,500 years has been anticipating and foreshadowing is amongst them right now, to the point even that by this time tomorrow, that lamb will be sacrificed. He will be in the grave. So when he utters this blessing, when he utters and gives thanks with this utterance, with the breaking of the bread, who blessed are you, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Do you see something more than just bread coming from the earth? It's his body that's coming. It's going to come from the earth. So he's going to be dead and buried. And 3 days later, from the earth, his body will be raised to life. Bread from the earth, through whom and by which we will have everlasting life. This bread from heaven. So there's more here going on than just going through the traditions of the Passover. He's filling them full of all that these observances have been anticipating for these last 1.5 millennia. So he has offered this last cup, the third one that we had seen, and it was with the third cup, the cup of, you remember what that cup represented? The cup of redemption. And it was that cup that Jesus had infused it with that meaning that he is the one who will redeem his people. And he's going to do so by an outstretched arm. So in Exodus Chapter 6, when the Lord said, it's with an outstretched arm, I'm going to do these things, it's a picture foreshadowing Isaiah chapter 53, or 52 in verse 10, 53 in verse 1, speaking about his outstretched arm, that he's going to bring salvation more than the Passover, and the fulfillment thereof, spoken of directly in Isaiah 52 and 53, is regarding the Messiah. These are messianic prophecies, referred to as the servant songs. There's 4 of them in Isaiah. So now Jesus, there will be a 4th cup, but it's not addressed here. It's not spoken of here. There's some things that are going to take place, and then the 4th cup is going to be celebrated or would be observed in a specific manner. The last cup, the 4th cup, anybody know what that cup was called?
Praise.
Cup of praise. Yeah. So I think we had that on our slide from last week. So the cup of praise. Take you as my people. Now this is out of Exodus chapter 6. So we could go there just for a moment. So we have our point of reference before us. This is where we get for all of these 4 cups come from the content that's spoken about here. So verses 6 and 7. Exodus 6, verses 6 and 7. And we're at, yeah, please.
Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them. And I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. Oops, sorry, that was too far.
That's all right.
I am the Lord.
So, I will take you to be my people. This is that last cup, the cup of praise. In the Hebrew, it's referred to as the Hallel. You recognize that word, Hallel? It's a Hebrew word, Hallel. What does it sound like in English? What is it?
Hallelujah.
Let's put that on the end of it. Hallel Yah. Praise. So this is praise, Hallel, and Yah. This is how we spell it, is J-A-H, but it would be Y-A-H. It is the Lord. So praise the Lord. So that would be the last cup of the meal together, of their evening. But it's not listed, it's not spoken of. So the 2nd cup and the 4th cup aren't spoken about. They're not referenced, but they are understood to be part of this meal. Now, let's come to Matthew chapter 26. Before I do that, sorry, I'm taking you prematurely. We're going to go there. But before we do that, I want to do John chapter 13 and beginning in verse 31. (31 to 38).
When he was gone, Jesus said, Now is the Son of Man glorified. God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me just as I told the Jews. So I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Simon Peter asked him, Lord, where are...
I said 38. Let's stop there in 30. Let's start in 35. We'll continue from 36 to 38 in just a few minutes. Okay. Judas has left the meal. He's gone out of the house and he's gone to take care of whatever business it is that he has prearranged. Now, the Lord has spoken to him and has called him out. The rest of the disciples don't understand what's going on. Even though Jesus has already said that the hand of my betrayer is at the table with me, and they're all saying, is it I, is it I, is it I? And then Peter says to John, motions to him, ask him who it is. Well, Jesus gives the description that the one that's back here in verse 26, the one with whom I give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it. So he does that, but he's been doing this with several of the disciples. So it gets clouded from their perspective. It's not clouded in the speaking of it, but their understanding is clouded. They don't get it. Otherwise, they'd be saying, I know why Judas has left. It's because he's going to go and meet with the chief priests and the elders, and he's about to turn Jesus in. Had they known and understood what was going on, what would they have done at that point? They would have tried to stop it, right? They'd have tackled Judas. Said, you think you're going to get away with this? But Jesus is orchestrating every single detail. Because as you recall, they had determined, the elders and the chief priests had determined that they weren't going to do it during the feast. But it had to be during the feast for Jesus to fulfill all that was a part of this. So remember, there's 4 feasts that take place in the spring, and 3 of them are going to occur within a matter of days of each other. And Jesus is going to fulfill those 3 during this point in time. Through his death and his resurrection, the 4th feast he will fulfill 10 days after he ascends to the Father. So what are those 4 feasts? All right, so we have Passover. What else? What did Jesus break? What did he say? This is my
Body.
And what was it that he broke? What kind? Unleavened bread. So it's the feast of unleavened bread. Then there will be one more feast that he will fulfill 3 days later, which is the feast of first fruits. We'll deal with first fruits more when we come to the resurrection itself. But to find the references where these are spoken about, we see Passover and unleavened bread spoken about in Exodus chapters 12 and 13. That's where it is established, this feast. The observance of first fruits isn't given to the people of Israel when they first come out of Egypt. It's given to them a little while later when they come into the wilderness after they've been at Mount Sinai. And then the Lord is going to give them instruction in Leviticus chapter 23, telling them that when you come into the land that I've promised to you, then you will observe first fruits. So this is the third of the spring, of the yearly feasts. So the third is in the spring. So we'll deal with first fruits more. And the 4th one is, we might as well name it. Anybody know? Feast of Weeks. Or another name for it is Feast of Harvest. And you will probably know it better as Pentecost. So that's the Greek name for this feast, Pentecost. So the Feast of Weeks is spoken about in Leviticus 23 as well. And then, of course, we see it referred to as Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. So when Pentecost had fully come, we'll deal with that when we're coming on to the end of the resurrection. Okay? So Jesus he's orchestrating everything. He has put things into motion completely. So the betrayal is in motion. Now, this isn't Jesus' design. It's that he knows this is what would take place. And so he's able to speak about it. It would even be spoken about by David when he writes this messianic psalm in Psalm 34, I think it is, where I've been betrayed. My close friend has betrayed me. Do you know right off? I think it might be 34 and 20 or 34 and verse 10. So prophesied even 1,000 years in advance, not because it's an educated guess, but because the Lord knows the end from the beginning. And we've said this before, the prophecy is not prediction. Prophecy is speaking history before it happens. So now that Judas is gone, Jesus then says, now is the Son of Man glorified. This is in John 13 and the verse 31. So he doesn't bring these details out when Judas is still there, because he is referred to as the son of perdition, the son of sin. Jesus is going to even say that I've lost none except for the son of perdition. This is what he's going to pray later on tonight. Some have said, in trying to harmonize the order of events of this Passover meal, that it's most likely that Judas wasn't there during the breaking of the bread and the cup of redemption when he said, this is the cup of the new covenant. That it's quite possible that Jesus did these elements after Judas left. But trying to blend them and determine completely with 100% accuracy that that's the case, it's speculation that that's...
Yeah, I think that Judas is probably there. They probably would have wondered why in the world a Jewish man would be skipping out of Passover.
Yeah,
I
so...
think that would be a big deal to the disciples. They would question that.
So that would be one aspect of it. The other side of it is that some would say that because he wasn't part of the covenant recipient, that he wasn't there for this aspect when Jesus was saying this is the cup of the new covenant. But that's not to say that somebody hasn't participated in the Lord's Supper that isn't a follower of Jesus Christ. All right? But certainly we see that now that he's gone, he's telling them that the time has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. It wasn't too long ago that he was saying this. As a matter of fact, it was earlier this week when he was saying this in John chapter 12, when the Gentiles, some Greeks, came wanted to see Jesus. And he said that my hour has come to be glorified. And he speaks about him being lifted up and indicating by what means he would die. The people didn't understand it, but John is saying that all of these things were in fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecies, because Isaiah spoke about him when he saw him, when he saw Jesus. So there's the whole climax here is about Jesus being glorified by the Father through the crucifixion and resurrection, and through his obedience that he would be glorifying the Father. So you see what he's spoken here. Verse 32, if God is glorified in him, so that's through the cross, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him at once. So he's given them some consolation now. You're going to seek me, and you are not going to be able to come where I'm going, because he's going to the Father. There's a time that they're not going to be able to come with him. But he gives them a command now. And it's a command that he's going to repeat in just a little while before the evening is out. Just as I have loved you, what does he say? Look at verse 34. It's a new commandment that he gives. Just as I have loved you, now love one another. This is in light of what he's already demonstrated earlier this evening, just a short while ago. Now, it's difficult for us to think in terms of earlier this evening when that event didn't take place in the evening where we are studying this, right? But just a short while ago, Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Now, this is 2 weeks ago in our study time. But he washes the disciples' feet. In so doing, he's showing them the full extent of his love. And he says that what I have done for you, now you are to do for one another. And this was in light of something that they were caught up in. Jesus does this right on the heels of them arguing about something. What was their argument? Who is the greatest? Exactly. So now Jesus steps in and he doesn't rebuke them at this point. What does he do? He gets up and he wraps a towel around his waist after he takes off his cloak, and then he goes and begins washing his disciples' feet. So in demonstrating this love, this humility and submitting to the will of the Father, that he is glorifying God, and in so doing, he's demonstrating love like it has never been seen before. So then he takes not just the command to do what I have done for you, but he expresses it in even greater clarity, saying, this is the command now. As I have loved you, now you are to love one another. Do you remember when the lawyer came and asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then Jesus says, and the second commandment is like unto it, which is love your neighbor as yourself. And in these two commandments, all the law and the prophets are summed up. So love God with everything that you have, everything that you are. And secondarily, then love your neighbor as yourself. But Jesus says, I'm giving you a new commandment, because loving your neighbor as yourself is one kind of love. But he says, I want you to love them even more than you love yourself. I want you to love them as I have loved you. And that aspect of loving as I have loved you is not just in the context of him washing their feet, but it's also in the context of what he's about to do for them tomorrow. Because he's going to humble himself to death, even death on the cross. And Jesus will speak about this in chapter 15. So we'll sort of forecast here, where he says, greater love is no man than this, than he would lay down his life for his friends. So they don't understand all of this dying talk, except for them it's figurative. In other words, Jesus, well, sure, you would lay down your life for us. Of course you would. I mean, you've already told us about your love. But they don't understand that he is literally going to lay down his life. So he's giving them this command prior to him fully demonstrating that kind of love. So to love one another as I have loved you, laying down your life for one another. Can you do that in your own strength? No. I can't even do that for my wife in my own strength. And she can't do that for me. The people that we love the most, we can't love as Christ loved us in our own strength. We can love them in a certain way and to a certain degree, but we can't love them as Christ loved us, not in our own strength. Because it's not a possibility for us to love anybody in this capacity in our own strength. It can only be by the Spirit of God who dwells in us. So Jesus is preparing them for what he's about to continue to tell them, to instruct them with, and to give them promises regarding. So it is by this means that all will know that you are my disciples, by this evidence that you have, verse 35, what's the evidence? Everybody will know you're my disciples by this. You love one another. And that love is a Christ-like love. Well, now that brings us to verses 36 to 38. So let's take a look at that. Are we at Johnny, I think? Or Carolyn? Carolyn.
Simon Peter asked him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus replied, where I am going you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. Peter asked, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Then Jesus answered, will you really lay down your life for me? I tell you the truth, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times.
That's heavy. Peter thinks he knows his own heart, but he doesn't. Now, the timeline is a little bit different with Matthew and with Mark. They say that after the meal, or when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them. So this is Matthew 26 and verse 31. So after they've gone, they sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus says, you will all fall away because of me this night. And then it's in this context that Matthew records that in verse 33, Peter says, though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. And then Jesus says, truly I tell you that tonight, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. It appears as though this is spoken to Peter twice, 2 different contexts.
Or do you think maybe the stuff that's in chapter 14, 15, and 16 is actually spoken to them on Mount Olivet?
In John chapter 17.
Chapter 18, it said when he spoke these words, he went out with them across the Kidron Brook.
Yeah, I'm gonna be bringing to us in John 17. Jesus gives the high priestly prayer, and it says he lifts up his eyes, okay, and then he prays this prayer: Father, the hour has come, glorify your Son. Let me fast forward just a little bit to John 17. After a Passover meal is ended, it is, if people are in Jerusalem, as many as are able to do, they will go to the temple to pray. At the very least, there will be a prayer that will take place at the end of the Passover celebration, the observance, the meal. When their evening is over, then there would be a prayer offered by the father of the house, the patriarch, the host, whoever it is that's in giving leadership to it. But in Jesus' day, as many as could, they would go to the temple, and there they would offer that prayer. It would seem most likely that, let's bring up a map, okay? We're going to look at, it's going to go ahead a few, Deb. Okay, so you're going to see a map of Jerusalem, a model. Now, this is the area that we're looking at. I'm going to have to go ahead to a different one. Just one second. Okay, it's this one that I want to look at. It's the same map as far as those online are looking at, but I had to move to a different screen. All right, so it's probably, if you didn't go like 4 ahead or so, then that's probably not the right one, but it's the same, it's still Jerusalem, it's just something I was going to highlight in it. All right, so this is the area right here that's circled, all right, where the Passover meal is taking place with the disciples. Is that, no, that's a different one, so you need to go ahead to a few others. Go ahead, stop there. There we go. Okay, that's the one right there. All right, so this is the area where the disciples had their meal with Jesus. Now, they're going to head to where? What is their destination tonight? Where is Jesus going to be arrested? Mount of Olives in the Garden of Gethsemane. So in order to get there, look at the path that they've got to take. They will come this direction. Now, this is a model, all right? So we don't have the Mount of Olives pictured here. But do you see where the building is located there with, 6 porticos, pillars? All right, so can I just take that just for a second?
Top right.
All right, it's right up here, okay? So this region right here, because this is a model, it's just showing Jerusalem, all right? And an artist's depiction of it. But this area is the area that would be, if the model continued, if it was that large, this would be the area of the Mount of Olives. This would be the area of the Garden of Gethsemane. Yeah, this is at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, okay?
That's actual people size. This isn't.
Yeah, so do you see the people that are there? This is an idea how big this model is, or relatively how small it is. So this is not the city of Jerusalem, this is a model thereof. So in order for them to get to the Garden of Gethsemane, and they would cross the Kidron Valley, they would come onto the other side of the temple, and it would be quite reasonable that Jesus would lead them to the temple to pray this last prayer of the Passover observance, and then continue on their way to the Garden of Gethsemane. So this is the temple, and on the opposite side, running this way right here, which wouldn't be visible because it's a valley below the Temple Mount, but that would be the Kidron Valley, and then they would come up the other slope to the Mount of Olives, the upward slope to the Garden of Gethsemane. And then, of course, if you continued up that slope, once you got to the peak, then you're heading to Bethany and Bethphage, so that region. All right? Does that help put some things into perspective for us? So in light of that, we can't be absolute and say with certainty that this took place here or there, but it would seem as though these events are taking place of John 13:14, at the very least, are taking place while they're still in that upper room and still observing the Passover meal and all of the teachings and so on that will be taking place. And that by chapter 15, they'll be making their way to the Kidron, or what Jesus knows will be the temple, first of all. And as they're making their way, he would be instructing them further with the contents of chapters 15 and 16, or parts thereof. And then when they get to the temple, Jesus will then lift up his eyes to heaven, to his Father, and pray while he's at the house, his Father's house, right? So it seems as though this is happening, these two where Peter says, I will not deny you, and so on. And Jesus says, before the night's out, you'll deny 3 times having known me before the rooster crows. So it's possible that that's one event that happened once there at the Mount of Olives. But it's also possible that it happens twice, once while they're still in the upper room, and then a second time later when Jesus tells them, you are all going to be scattered. And then Peter says, no. And then it's like Jesus says, Peter, I've already told you. You're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows tonight. And then he protests once again. It's for consideration at the very least. What we need to recognize for sure, that what the scripture tells us did happen. Peter was told, Jesus told him, you are going to deny me. The timeline we can't be absolutely certain about. Okay, so I'm just helping us to visualize, to picture what quite likely was a timeline for consideration. So that being the case, let's continue in John chapter 13. So Peter, he is protesting now, okay? And he's saying that I will not deny you. Let's bring this up. Jesus said before the rooster, we need to come back just after the cups, okay? I think it's the third slide that's there. The trumpeter, yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, so do you remember this image that we had looked at several weeks ago now? This is a stone carving that was situated at the top of the temple, the pinnacle of the Temple Mount. And the writing that is here, see if it's clearer on this one. All right, the second slide, you can see the writing a little more clearly, and it says the place of the trumpeting. And this is what its location would have been. So there is the city, the model of Jerusalem once again. And what is circled here is that southwestern corner of the Temple Mount. And that is where this stone that we just looked at, the place of the trumpeting, or the place of the trumpeter, where scholars believe that one of the priests would have had a shofar there. And from there he would have blown that shofar in order to signal the Sabbath has arrived, or it's just about to arrive. So within minutes of the Sabbath arriving, the priest would take up that shofar, which would be situated at that corner on a shelf, because there'd be no opportunity for him to carry it to another place to store it, because you can't carry a burden on the Sabbath. All right, so he would then blare that shofar to indicate that the Shabbat, the Sabbath, has arrived, because it comes in at what time of day? The evening, not the morning, right? Morning begins the day for the Jewish reckoning of time. Now, when Jesus says, before the rooster crows, you will have denied me 3 times. When's that going to happen? Tonight, right? It's going to happen tonight. So Jesus isn't saying, at some time this is going to happen. He's saying, tonight, before the rooster crows, you will deny me. You will have had denied me 3 times. What is Jesus saying here? We've always pictured it as being Peter, he denies the Lord once, denies him a second time, and denies him a third time. And then upon the third time, what do we see? Depicted in movies, dramatizations, what happens? That's very good. Wow. I was convinced. I thought there was a rooster in the room. Is that what we've pictured taking place? Looking at me blankly. Anybody picture it differently?
Most of my life until I learned differently.
Okay. So the rabbis would have taught at that time that you were not allowed to have roosters, chickens, just loose throughout Jerusalem, for fear that they would, just because chickens roam, right? Roosters roam. They don't stay in one spot unless they're in cages. But most of the time they're left free range. And so they didn't want the temple becoming defiled by having free range chickens, roosters, just going around and then defecating wherever it is that they happen to find themselves. And so within the area of Jerusalem, they weren't allowed just to be free. And so for the most part, they were out in the surrounding Jerusalem and then outwards. Any other cities and towns and villages were fine. Now, besides that, for the morning, every morning, here's what would take place. There would be the trumpeter that would come to this place of trumpeting. And he would give 3 blasts of that. The first time, I should have my shofar here and give a blast. I won't blast it, but can we just have it so that it's visible, please, if you don't mind? So the first blast that would be given in the wee hours of the morning while it's still dark would be a signal to the priests, all priests to sacrifice. So prepare yourself to come to the temple for the morning sacrifice. And then for the Levites, thank you. So he'd give one blast at that point. And so the second time he gives a blast, it would be to all the Levites to their stations, because the Levites had to prepare themselves to assist the priests in the offering of the sacrifices. And then the third blast would be all Israelites come to worship. So there'd be one blast, and then a wait of whatever period of time, and then a second blast, and then a third blast. All priests come to sacrifice. All Levites, come and prepare yourselves at your stations. And then all Israelites, come to worship. Now this man that had this job of sounding this was called the Geveni, the announcer. And there was a word that was used that in the Hebrew sounds and looks like rooster, but it means this announcer, this Geveni. But in the Greek, it would be, it was translated as rooster. It would just be said there as rooster when it was translated into the English. So Jesus, what he's speaking here is this, that before the trumpeter sounds tomorrow morning, you'll have had denied 3 times that you know him.
No rooster involved.
There's no rooster.
Well, that just...
This guy that is doing this is what is mistranslated as rooster. So it would be like a colloquialism. So that wording that was used, they would have used the word that was rooster, but it meant this Giveni, the announcer.
I don't think taught this for over 50 years.
Yeah. See, without the Jewish background, we're in a Western mindset.
Yeah. Oh, I get it.
So without that, we don't have the background that fills in the picture more completely. Does it change the reality that Peter denied Jesus? Does it change the reality that there was a blaring, a blasting that took place? Whether it was an animal, a rooster that did it, or this announcer, there was still the awareness. When Peter heard it, he's reminded the words of Jesus. But it's interesting that when you see it in this context, that what is the context of which he is sort of snapped out of his denials to the truth and reality?
So is there not verbiage somewhere that says immediately the cock crew?
Yeah, the rooster crowed, which means that the trumpeter blared his shofar.
Again, going from Greek to English.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's that muddling that comes from the colloquialisms from the Hebrew, then into the Greek, into the English. It just kind of does this, gets mashed up.
Just like that thing was all twisted.
Yeah, okay. But think about what was it that sort of snapped him to a soberness of what he had just done. Sound of the trumpet. But what was the trumpet declaring? So the third one was come and worship. The first one was all priests come to sacrifice. What is going on right now when he's denying? On that third one, what Jesus is being led out, and he looks at Peter. They look at one another. And Jesus is sacrifice. So when the trumpeter is saying all priests to sacrifice, what have the priests been doing at this point in time? Up until this time, the priests have been what? Majority of them. What have the chief priests been doing? Accusing Jesus. They've been holding a mock trial. But the trumpeter is saying, come to sacrifice. And here's the lamb who's being led out from the high priest's place, his house, and he locks eyes with Peter. Not with condemnation, but with love. And then the second time, there's another blast. All Levites to your stations. Get ready for the work to which you have been ordained. And then the third one was all Israelites, in light of the sacrifice, come and worship. Now, if it's two events where Peter was told that he's going to deny the Lord, we need to at least take it all together as at one treatment right now and see that Jesus has told him, Peter, I have prayed for you because Satan has desired to sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you. After you have, I've prayed for you that what? Your faith would not fail. And after you have been restored, strengthen your brothers. So what does Jesus say? Before the event even takes place, he tells him up front, I will not condemn you. Because if he was going to condemn him when the event takes place, he had just as much authority to condemn him right then, because it was as though he had already done the deed. Isn't that right? But Jesus does not condemn him, does he? He says, I've prayed for you. What does that mean? He says that I have called on heaven to be your strength.
This is what Peter says. He said, I'll lay down my life for you. And Jesus says, will you truly lay down your life for me? After just having the conversation of you have to love others like I love you, he's just saying, see, Peter, you can't love me like I love you until I do this.
Yeah. I have to do this, then you can love me. And that's why Jesus will say, and we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but Jesus will say on the shores of Galilee after his resurrection, about a week later, he's going to say to Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. So Jesus is restoring him. Not that he was out of favor, but letting Peter know, just as you denied me 3 times, I'm showing you 3 times the strength of my love. You've not been disqualified. Well, with that, Jesus then gives some promises and some admonitions in John chapters 14, 15, and 16. So let's come and start with a couple of them and see. We won't be having time to deal with every aspect that these 3 chapters contain, because if we did, Jesus is never going to get to the cross, and we're never going to see the resurrection, because we'll be here for we'll be here for 2 months of Tuesdays. So we're going to hit some high points here, all right? Let's see some promises and some admonitions that Jesus gives in chapter 14, 15, and 16. Let's begin by looking at verses 1 and 2. 1 to 3. 1 to 3. John 14, verses 1 to 3.
John 14, 1 to 3. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am.
All right.
Yes.
So Jesus is making a promise here that he's saying, I'm preparing a place for you. And everything that Jesus has been doing throughout this night and the fulfillment of what the Passover has been leading up to for these past 1.5 millennia, 1,500 years, is basically enacting the betrothal that they would have been so familiar with, that would have taken place in Galilee, that they would have been aware of so many times over and over again. That in the betrothal between a man and a woman, that dependent upon their age, as a young man and a young lady, the father of the bride and the father of the groom would then escort their children to the place of betrothal, wherever that was predetermined. The father of the groom would pour a flask of wine and give it to his son. His son, in taking that cup, was indicating, I submit myself to your will. Because if he wasn't prepared to take that cup, then he would have told his father in advance, I don't want to have anything to do with this marriage, with this arrangement. So don't waste the time of yours or mine or the other family, or any of the villagers, townsfolk that may come out to be witnesses. So he's already predetermined that he's going to pursue this relationship. So he receives the cup from his father. He will drink from it. Then he will offer it to the young lady in front of him that he desires to betroth himself to and to take as his wife. If she receives the cup from his hand and drinks from it, she's saying, I accept your offer of betrothal, and I give myself to you and you alone. So it's like an engagement for us here in the West, but much more than an engagement, in that this was all of the obligations, the legalities of a marriage, except for the intimacy, the physical intimacy. So no intercourse until the wedding day, and they're not to live under the same roof. So once that took place, do you see any parallels of what's going on in the Lord's Supper? He's taking the cup, and he drinks of it, and he offers it to his disciples, and he says, this is the cup of the covenant, the new covenant in my blood. So there was a purchase price, a bride price that was paid, and so this was that bride price which was being indicated. Then they would go to their respective homes, and for the next at least a year, the son would then be building onto his father's house. So you can have a look at the screen. Yeah, that's it. This is called an insula. And an insula would be the father's house, and then the son would build onto that house. And that house, that add-on, was called a dwelling place. It's an unfortunate translation where some translations have translated this dwelling place in John 14, I go away to prepare a place for you. If it was not so, I would have told you. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. But unfortunate translation says, in my Father's house are many mansions. No. My Father's house are many dwelling places, meaning insulae, which they would have recognized immediately. This is marriage talk here. And then when that insula was completed, the father of the groom would then say, go get your bride. So Jesus said, I'm going away to prepare a place for you. And if I go away to prepare a place for you, I will come again to take you to be with me where I am. So we see here this is a promise of preparing a place for his disciples, for us, his disciples. It's also a promise that he's coming back to take us to be where? Not to meet him in the air and then come back down to earth immediately in order to rule and reign during the millennium. As some people would say, yes, there's a rapture, but it's at the end of the tribulation. He's gonna catch us into the air. We'll meet him in the clouds, and we'll be dressed in white. We'll get on our horses, and we'll turn around and ride right back to where we had been just moments ago. This is speaking about the catching up of the church, the harpazo, the rapture of the church prior to the tribulation. So I will come back and take you to be with me where I am. Not in the clouds, but the place that he had prepared for us, the dwelling place, in his Father's house. For that time, for earth time, it'll be for a period of 7 years. Let's go down to verse 12. Let's go to 14, 12 to 14, and we'll take it in a couple of spots here.
I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. And I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Son may bring glory to the Father. You may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it.
Now, when he says asking anything in my name, does he mean anything? He means anything that is in accordance with the Father's will. Right? Now, some teachers have taken this completely out of context, and in order to justify them asking and basically demanding from God whatever it is they desire, whatever their heart's desire is, whatever possessions or goods or achievements might happen to be, that they believe that to be the case. But in 1 John chapter 5 and verse 14, it says, "And this is the confidence that we have toward him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us in whatever we ask, we know that we have the requests that we have asked of him." So it's in accordance with his will. And that's why there's sometimes when we pray that we don't see those prayers as we would expect right away, or in whatever time frame. The Lord may say, there's a different way that I want to see this carried out. And so he will be changing our hearts in preparation for whatever it is that his will is, so that he would be giving us his desires. Because prayer isn't primarily about our list of things that we want to see accomplished. Prayer is primarily about the heart of God and him working in us, so that we would be in communion and unity with him by his Spirit. So he promises that we will do greater works. This doesn't mean in quality, because there's nothing we can do that is greater than what Jesus did. This is greater things will we do because of the quantity, the time frame, and the work of Jesus by his Spirit in his body throughout the entire globe. There have been, and will continue to be, things done greater than what he was able to accomplish during the 3.5 years of his ministry, simply because of the limited space and time that he had in order to accomplish what he did. He did amazing things. And John says that if we were to record everything that Jesus did, I suppose there wouldn't be enough books to contain it all. But he continues to do this amazing work through us. And the other aspect is that he will answer our prayers, and that we are to pray in his name. Then we get another promise in verses 16 to 18. Pardon me? I believe it is, yes.
16 to 18?
Yes, please.
15 to 17?
I want to do, well, you can do 15 to 18. I want 18 in there.
If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever, even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans, I will come to you.
So he's talking about the result of us loving him. If we love him, we'll keep his commandments. If we don't love him, we won't keep his commandments. He's going to speak that in a little bit. Those who do not love me will not keep my commandments. But those who do love me will keep my commandments. Then he's going to say, just a further ways along in verses 23 and 24, that both the Father and the Son will come and make their dwelling with us. That means not only does Jesus give us the promise that we will be with him someday. I'm going away, and I'm going to come and take you to be with me where I am someday. But he says, prior to that, if you love me, verses 23 and 24, that my Father will love him, we will come to him and make our home with him. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words, and the word that you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me. So he's saying, the evidence of your love is that you'll be doing what I say. So if you do love me, then you are the ones who are my followers. You are the ones who are my disciples. And you, he says, I am going to ask the Father, and he's going to give you another comforter, another helper, Parakletos, Paraclete. So an advocate, a helper, a comforter, meaning another who is just like me. How long will he be with you for? Forever. So that means we're not going to be abandoned. And he says the quality and the quantity by which he'll be with us is that he will be with you, and he will be, or rather, and furthermore, he will be in you. So you see the amazing aspect of what Jesus says is going to take place. He says, I'm going away, and he also says that it's better for you that I go away. Because if I don't go away, I can't send the Holy Spirit. I can't send this comforter. But if I do, then he's going to come, and he's going to dwell with you and in you. And he says in verse 18, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. And how is it that he'll come to us? By his Spirit. Even to the extent that in Acts chapter 16, the Spirit of the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, is named or referred to as the Spirit of Jesus. I want to take just a couple of more minutes here to finish this off and tie up to the end of chapter 14. So I already mentioned that we'll be loved by the Father and the Son, that'll be dwelling, so that's verses 23 and 24. I want to look at verses 26 and 27. And we are at Carolyn.
But the Counselor, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid.
So we have here the promise that the Holy Spirit is going to teach us and that he's going to give us divine peace. Now it is suggested by some that at this point, Jesus then takes his disciples and they begin making their way to the temple and then the Mount of Olives. And chapter 17 would be their arrival at the temple. Whether it's a break here at chapter 15 or chapter 16 or at the end of chapter 16, and then they make their way and they arrive at the temple. We can't be dogmatic about it. But at whatever point it takes place, Jesus would then take this last cup of the Passover meal as they get ready to leave. And it's a cup of praise, the Hallel. And the Hallel would be the last two psalms at the most likely psalm, the last psalm of what is referred to as the Hallel Psalms of chapters Psalm 113 to 118, which would be recited and sung throughout their Passover meal. So this last cup would have been chapter 118 and quite likely Psalm 136.
When I looked at it, it said 113 and 114 was done with cup 2, and then after cup 3, they did 115 through to 118.
After cup 3. All right, most of what I looked at would be that 118 would be left until the last cup. It would be the last thing that they did together. That in connection with Psalm 136. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Give thanks to the God of gods. His love endures forever. Give thanks to the Lord of lords. His love endures forever. Give thanks to the God of Abraham, and so on, things that he has done. And each time, at the end of each verse, his love endures forever. Or, looking at that, it says, his covenantal loyalty, his loyalty to the covenant endures forever. Psalm 118 is one aspect of what they would have been praying or singing. So in Matthew chapter 26, where it says in verse 30, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. I'm sorry, if you are of the era that loves the hymns and the hymn books and wish there wouldn't be singing on the slides, but it would be from the hymn book or the old hymns, that yes, look, see, even Jesus sung hymns. This is not what that's talking about. This is talking about the Psalms. Psalm 118. So they would have sung this psalm. And an aspect of it that I want to draw your attention to. I encourage you to take time to look at the entire psalm. But I want to look at verse 24. What does it say?
This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
Okay, I'm going to get you to just read that just a bit louder because I doubt that picked up very well on our microphone.
This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
What does that refer to? What does that mean? This means the day that Jesus dies, the day of redemption that comes finally into existence. We have no doubt grown up with the song at different times, this is the day that the Lord has made. Do we know it? I will rejoice and be glad in it. And most often it was like, I'm going to give thanks for this day and for tomorrow, this day. But that's not what this is speaking about. Go back to verse 22 and let's take it in context. I mean, the context grows out even bigger than that to the entire chapter. But looking at verses 22 to 24 specifically, all right? So 22 and 23, what does that say?
The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes.
The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. This is speaking about the building of the temple. There's a rabbinic story that goes something like this. That at the building of the temple, because there was no stone or chiseling, no sound of a hammer was allowed to be heard within the precincts of the temple. That everything had to be done at the stone quarry. And they would send their designs and say, this is what we need. And then they would cut the stones, and then they would send them to the construction site of the temple. And so one of the first stones that was cut and sent was the capstone. But when they saw it, they didn't like it. It didn't seem like it was going to fit because they didn't have anything else to work with. And it just didn't seem as though it was the right dimensions. So it was set to the side. And for the duration of the build, each of these courses of stones were taken and they were put in place and they fit properly and precisely. Then it came time for the last stone to be put in place, the capstone. And they are looking for the capstone, and then they can't find it. They send word back to the quarry. They said, we need the capstone. They said, we already sent that. That was one of the first stones that we sent over. And then one of the construction workers recalls that stone that had been set aside, but by this time had been grown over by weeds and grass and so on. But they remembered the area that had been placed. And when they had cut away and wiped away all of that debris, they took it and it fit perfectly into the place. And they rejoiced and gave praise to God. But formerly or originally, it was rejected. Now, that's a rabbinic story. It's not a biblical prophecy or account that had taken place. But that gives a picture of what even the rabbis would give as a depiction, which pictures and fills this prophecy that the capstone, the stone that the builders rejected, has become the capstone, meaning the one that appeared to have no beauty or no importance or authority. Jesus has become that capstone, even to the point that Acts speaks about it. It records this passage for us in Acts chapter 4 and verse 11. It quotes this passage. So this would be Peter speaking about it. And then we also have in 1 Peter, he references it once again that Jesus has become the capstone. Even as we are being built up into the spiritual house, Jesus, the stone that the builders rejected. That speaks of the chief priests and the elders. And this is what we're seeing even now. While Jesus is sharing this meal, the chief priests and elders are getting ready to arrest Jesus, because by this time, most likely, Judas has arrived where they are and making preparation to go to Gethsemane to arrest him. So in reciting and singing this Hallel, this song, this hymn, Jesus is showing fulfillment of this, that this is the day, because the Lord has designed this. This is the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes. This is the day the Lord has made. This day of salvation and redemption. I will rejoice and be glad in it. So we'll leave that there, and we'll pick up the rest of the promises and the admonitions that Jesus will be giving before he offers what is referred to as his high priestly prayer.